Quick one. Last video hit over 100 comments, which is absolutely mind-blowing for this channel. Let's try that again for this video. Comment down what you think about these stories, or just a hello, and the team will reply. We always reply to the comments. As always, please like and subscribe and help this channel grow. Thank you. Okay, so basically, where do I even begin? I should have known that things were going to end badly with this chick Samantha. Looking back, there were so many red flags that I ignored, convinced that I could somehow fix her or that she would change with time. But the truth is, Samantha was unstable from the beginning, and our relationship was doomed to end in disaster. It all started a few months into our relationship. Samantha had always been a bit possessive, constantly worried that I was going to leave her for someone else. But one day she took it too far. I had gone out for drinks with some of my coworkers after a long day at the office, and when I got home, Samantha was waiting for me, furious. She accused me of cheating and started throwing things around the apartment. I tried to calm her down, but she was inconsolable. That night, as I lay in bed trying to sleep, I heard a noise outside. I looked out the window and saw Samantha standing in the parking lot, staring up at our apartment. I watched in horror as she got into her car and sped off. I knew I should have called the police, but I was too shaken up to do anything. The next day at work, I got a call from Samantha. Her voice was eerily calm as she told me that she had seen me running like a cute cheetah as I fled from her car the night before. I felt a chill run down my spine. I knew I needed to get away from her, but I was too afraid to make a move. Over the next few weeks, Samantha's behavior only got worse. She would show up at my workplace waiting for me in the parking lot. She would call me constantly, sometimes dozens of times a day, demanding to know where I was and who I was with. I tried to break things off with her, but she would threaten to hurt herself if I did. Finally, one night, I decided I had had enough. I was working late at the office trying to get ahead on a project when I heard a commotion outside. I looked out the window and saw Samantha's car speeding towards the building. I quickly grabbed my things and ran out the back door, hoping to make it to my car before she could catch me. As I raced down the alley behind the office, I could hear the screeching of tires behind me. Samantha was chasing me, and she was gaining fast. I ran as fast as I could, but the alley was a dead end, with a high fence blocking my escape. I looked around frantically, trying to find a way out, but there was nothing. Suddenly, Samantha's car came barreling around the corner, and I knew I was trapped. She drove straight at me, and I barely managed to jump out of the way as the car slammed into the fence. Shaking, I ran to the other end of the alley, but Samantha was already out of the car and coming after me. I don't know how I made it, but I somehow managed to scale the fence and drop down on the other side, landing in a small court area between the buildings. I could hear Samantha screaming my name on the other side of the fence, but I didn't stop to look back. I ran in my car and drove straight home, my heart pounding the entire way. Once I was safely inside my apartment, I collapsed on the couch, shaking uncontrollably. I couldn't believe what had just happened. Samantha had tried to run me down with her car, and I had barely escaped with my life. I knew I needed to report what had happened to the police, but I was too scared. I was afraid that Samantha would find out and come after me again, and I couldn't bear the thought of going through something like that again. Instead, I did the only thing I could think of. I changed the locks on my apartment and installed a security system. For the next few weeks, I lived in constant fear, jumping at every noise and looking over my shoulder everywhere I went. I was terrified that Samantha would find me and finish what she had started. I stopped going out with friends, and I even considered quitting my job to get away from her. But then one day, I called from an unknown number. It was Samantha, and she was crying. She told me that she was sorry for what she had done, and that she was getting help for her mental health issues. She begged me to give her another chance, promising that she had changed. I was skeptical, but a part of me wanted to believe her. I had loved Samantha, and a small part of me still did. So, against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her for coffee. As I sat across from her in the cafe, I could see the sincerity in her eyes. She seemed genuinely remorseful, and I couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, she had changed. But then, just as I was about to let my guard down, Samantha said something that sent a chill down my spine. "You know, you really did look like a hot cheetah running away from me that night," she said, with a twisted smile. In that moment, I knew that I could never trust her again. Samantha was still unstable, and I knew that I needed to get as far away from her as possible. I made up an excuse and left the cafe, and I haven't spoken to her since. It's been over a year now, and I'm still looking over my shoulder, wondering if Samantha is out there waiting to pounce. I've moved to a new city and changed my phone number, but I can't shake the feeling that she's still out there, obsessed with me. I remember how terrified I felt that night in the alley, with Samantha bearing down on me in her car. I was sure she was going to kill me. The screech of the tires, her crazed expression, and the impact as she slammed into the fence just inches from where I was standing. It still haunts my nightmares. I had never been so relieved as I managed to scramble over that fence and escape from her. My legs were shaking and my heart was pounding, but I knew I had to get as far away from her as possible. I sprinted to my car, fumbling for the keys with trembling hands, and tore out of the parking lot. As I drove away, I kept checking the rearview mirror, terrified that I would see Samantha's car coming up behind me. But the streets were empty. Still, I couldn't calm down, couldn't stop replaying those terrifying moments in the alley over and over in my mind. Samantha really could have killed me that night. If I hadn't moved quick enough, or if the fence had been just a little higher, who knows what would have happened. She was clearly unstable and obsessed. As much as I wanted to believe she had changed, deep down I know that people like her rarely do. She's still out there somewhere, and I know in my gut that I haven't seen or heard the last of her. I'll be looking over my shoulder for the rest of my life, wondering when she'll pop up again. For now, all I can do is try to move on and rebuild some sense of normalcy. But I'll never forget that night, and I'll never fully trust anyone again after what Samantha put me through. She managed to destroy my life and sense of security with just one violent, unhinged act. And I have no doubt that, given the chance, she would do it again without hesitation. I was lucky to escape with my life once, but next time I might not be so fortunate. It's been 3 years since I broke up with my ex, Jenna. We dated for about a year and a half, and I thought we had something special. But things just didn't work out, and I ended up ending the relationship. It was messy, and Jenna took it really hard. I felt awful, but I knew it was the right thing to do. I moved out after that, and about a year later I started dating my current girlfriend, Emily. She's amazing, and I'm really happy with her. We've been together for almost 2 years now, and everything has been going great, or at least it was until a few weeks ago. It started with a text that Emily got on her phone from an unknown number. The person claimed to be a mutual friend of ours, let's call her Sarah, and said that they had some information about me that Emily needed to know. The text said that I had been cheating on Emily with my ex, Jenna. Emily was obviously really upset and confronted me about it. I was completely shocked and had no idea what was going on. I assured her that I would never cheat on her, and that this Sarah person was clearly lying. Emily believed me, and we brushed it off as some kind of weird prank. But then the texts kept coming. Sarah continued to insist that I was cheating, and even started revealing details about my relationship with Jenna that only she would know, like the location of a birthmark I have, and some of the intimate things I used to do with Jenna in bed. Emily was starting to get really freaked out, and I was getting more and more frustrated and confused. I tried to track down the number, but it was a disposable phone, and there was no way to trace it back to the person behind it. I also reached out to Jenna, but she swore up and down that she had no idea what was going on, and that she hadn't been in contact with me or Emily. After a couple of weeks of this harassment, Emily was at her wit's end. She was convinced that I was cheating despite my insistence that I wasn't. Things were really tense between us, and I could tell that the relationship was starting to unravel. Finally, one night, Emily got a text from Sarah saying that she had proof of my infidelity and that she was going to send it to Emily. Emily was in tears, begging me to just come clean if I had been unfaithful. I was desperate to convince her that I was telling the truth, but I didn't know what else to do. The next morning, Emily woke up to a disturbing video in her messages. It was of me and Jenna, naked and in a compromising position. I was horrified. I had no idea how this could have happened. Emily was devastated, and she immediately broke things off with me. I tried to explain that the video must have been faked, but Emily was too hurt and angry to listen. She packed up her things and moved out that day. I was left feeling completely helpless and alone, with no idea what to do next. Over the next few days, the harassment only got worse. Sarah continued to send Emily more and more proof of my infidelity, including explicit photos and messages that were supposedly between me and Jenna. Emily was in a state of constant distress, and I could see our relationship slipping away. I reached out to the police, but they said there wasn't much they could do without being able to trace the source of the messages and videos. I was at a total loss, and I could feel my world crumbling around me. Finally, After about a week of this nightmare, I decided to confront Jenna directly. I drove over to her apartment and demanded to know what was going on. At first, she denied everything, but eventually she broke down and admitted that she was the one behind the harassment. Apparently, she had never really gotten over me, and when she found out about Emily, she became consumed with jealousy and rage. She had somehow obtained my new girlfriend's phone number, bought a disposable phone, and started this whole elaborate scheme to try to ruin my relationship with Emily. I was absolutely stunned. I couldn't believe that Jenna would go to such lengths to try to destroy my life. I was heartbroken, not just for the loss of my relationship with Emily, but also for the realization that the woman I had once loved so deeply was capable of such cruelty and deception. I tried to reason with Jenna to get her to stop the harassment and come clean to Emily, but she refused. She was completely unapologetic and seemed to take a twisted sense of satisfaction in the pain she was causing me. In the end, I had no choice but to involve the police. Jenna was arrested and charged with stalking, harassment, and a number of other crimes. But the damage was already done. Emily was devastated and refused to even speak to me. Our relationship was over, and I was left to pick up the pieces. It's been a few weeks now, and I'm still trying to process everything that's happened. I feel betrayed, heartbroken, and utterly powerless. Jenna's actions have not only destroyed my relationship with Emily, but they've also shattered my sense of trust and security. I don't know what the future holds for me, but I know that I'll never be able to fully recover from this experience. The scars that Jenna has left on my life will be with me forever. All I can do now is try to move forward and hope that somehow, someway, I'll be able to find happiness and love again. As I look back on this whole ordeal, I can't help but feel a sense of anger and disbelief. How could someone I once trusted and cared for so deeply do something so twisted and malicious? I gave Jenna my heart, and she repaid me with nothing but pain and heartbreak. I know that I'm not the only one who's been through something like this. Crazy ex-partners who refuse to let go are sadly all too common, but that doesn't make it any easier to deal with. The fear, the paranoia, the constant looking over your shoulder, it's all consuming and exhausting. And what's worse is that there's no easy fix. The police can only do so much, and even if they manage to catch the perpetrator, the damage is already done. The trust had been broken, the relationship ruined, and the emotional scars will linger for a long, long time. All I can do now is try to pick up the pieces and move on. It won't be easy, but I have to at least try. I owe it to myself and to Emily to not let Jenna's twisted games destroy me completely. I have to find a way to rebuild my life and my sense of security. It's going to be a long, hard road, but I'm determined to get there. I just hope that someday I'll be able to look back on this and see it as a painful but important lesson learned. A reminder that no matter how much you care for someone, you can never truly know what they're capable of. And that sometimes the only way to heal is to let go and move forward, no matter how hard that may. When I think back to that time in my life, I still can't believe how crazy things got. I was young and foolish, and when I started dating her, I thought I had met the perfect girl. Things were great at first, but it didn't take long for the red flags to start popping up. She was jealous and controlling and flew into a rage if I so much as looked at another girl. I tried to make it work, but when she started talking about getting married and having kids after only a few months of dating, I knew I had to get out. So I worked up the courage to break things off. I tried to be as gentle as possible, but she didn't take it well at all. The crying, the screaming, the begging me to reconsider, it was a mess. I thought I had gotten through the worst of it, but I was wrong. A week later, she showed up on my doorstep with an ultrasound photo. She claimed she was pregnant and that I was the father. I was blown away. We had always been safe, and it just didn't seem possible. But she swore up and down it was true, and that she was keeping the baby. From that point on, it was like something out of a horror movie. She would call me sobbing in the middle of the night, telling me what a terrible father I was. She bombarded me with baby names, demanding I help her pick one. She even told my mother that she was going to be a grandmother. My mom was thrilled, which just added to the stress. No matter how much I denied it, she wouldn't listen to reason. The crazy ex then started showing up at my job. I worked at Borders at the time. She would come in flaunting her pregnant belly, making a huge scene in front of my coworkers. She had everyone convinced I was a deadbeat dad who wanted nothing to do with his unborn child. No matter how much I denied it, she had an answer for everything. Everyone thought I was a monster. I tried to get help from my friends and family, but no one believed me. My mom was over the moon about becoming a grandma and didn't want to hear anything against the ex. My coworkers thought I was just trying to avoid responsibility. I felt so alone and powerless. It was like I was living in an alternate reality. After weeks of harassment, I decided I'd had enough. I wasn't going to let her ruin my life over a fake pregnancy. I started digging for evidence that could expose her lies. I went through her social media with a fine-tooth comb, looking for any slip-ups or inconsistencies. Finally, I found what I needed: an old photo she had posted from a trip we took together, dated right around when she claimed she had gotten pregnant. In the photo, she was posing in a bikini, definitely not looking pregnant. Armed with this, I confronted her head-on. She still refused to admit she was lying, sticking to her story with incredible commitment. So I threatened to go public, exposing her deceit for everyone to see. I told her I would send a bikini photo to my mom and coworkers if she didn't come clean. Finally, she broke down in tears and admitted everything. She confessed to fabricating the entire pregnancy in order to win me back. She apologized for putting me through hell and agreed to leave me alone for good. I was simultaneously enraged and relieved. My nightmare was finally over. In the aftermath, I had a lot of fences to mend. I sat down with my mom and coworkers and told them the whole sordid story. They felt embarrassed that they had believed the ex's lies, but I didn't blame them. She had been incredibly convincing. I was just grateful to have the truth come out. As for the ex, I did my best to move on and forget her. I was thankful when she stayed true to her word and left me alone after her fake pregnancy scheme unraveled. I learned some hard lessons from that experience. Now I know to trust my instincts in relationships, and that manipulative people will go to extremes when they feel control slipping away. I'm proud of myself for standing up to her, even when it felt like I was alone against the world. I found strength I didn't know I had. These days, I'm focusing on the positives. I've become more resilient and gained self-confidence. I also have an amazing support system of friends and family who will have my back no matter what craziness comes my way next. My brush with relationship insanity puts so much in perspective. I'm just excited to see what healthy connections and opportunities await me. Looking back with some distance, I can see the warning signs that she was unstable from the very beginning. The constant need for attention, the wild mood swings, the over-the-top displays of affection, it was too much too soon. I was so caught up in how strong my feelings were that I ignored blatant red flags. Part of me wonders if I could have handled the breakup better. Maybe I shouldn't have blindsided her, instead slowly creating distance over time. But I was young and inexperienced when it came to serious relationships. I simply didn't have the tools to end things in a calm, rational way. Ultimately, the choice to fabricate a pregnancy was hers, not mine. Even if I made mistakes, that level of deception is never acceptable or justified. She took things to a disturbing extreme. I don't think most people are capable of concocting such an elaborate lie. There must have been some underlying mental health issues at play. The experience taught me to take it slowly in dating and not ignore warning signs, no matter how strong the chemistry is. Emotions can cloud judgment. I'm now attuned to any controlling, paranoid, or overly needy behaviors early on. I value open communication and setting healthy boundaries. Drama-free relationships may seem boring at first, but they're so worth it in the long run. One positive is that the ordeal brought my family and coworkers together. They realized they had wrongly judged me and apologized sincerely once the truth came out. My mom felt especially guilty about believing the ex's lies. It took time to rebuild trust, but those relationships emerged stronger. The people who really care about me had my back. A decade later, I'm thankful to have that crazy chapter of my life solidly in the rear view mirror. It made me warier and wiser when it comes to romance. I've learned to listen to my gut and watch for red flags. But I'm also more compassionate, realizing you never know the struggles someone's going through. With age comes perspective. Although I wouldn't wish that experience on anyone, it taught me so much about human nature, both the darkness and the light. What matters is that I didn't let it harden my heart, but rather deepened my care for others. The past can't be changed, but the future is unwritten. I was engaged to my high school girlfriend. We had been together for years, and even though she didn't treat me well, I stuck with her. After we graduated, we moved in together, but it was obvious things weren't going anywhere. I finally worked up the courage to end it. Since I was the one working and making money, I kept the apartment and asked her to move out. I think I gave her a couple weeks' notice, but this was a long time ago, so the details are fuzzy. She eventually found some other guy to stay with, so she was out of my life. Every so often, though, she'd come by the apartment because she had left all of her stuff there while she was looking for a new place to live. I kept hearing from people about how she was hooking up with any guy she could find. I tried to avoid it and her as much as I could. But at some point, out of anger, I went into her jewelry box and took back the engagement ring I had given her. It was a few weeks before she realized it was gone. By then, I had already sold it and told her as much when she confronted me about it at the apartment. She completely flipped out. She started demanding I give the ring back or at least give her the cash it had been worth. I informed her that's not how engagement rings work and told her to leave me alone. That's when she started hitting me and trashing my place. I was a black belt at the time, so I could have stopped her easily since she was smaller than me. But I just let her get her anger out. She ripped my shirt, slapped me, punched, kicked, even bit me. Finally, she punched me right in the face and knocked my head into the door behind me. On the other side of that door was a calendar hanging on a nail that stuck through just enough to stab the back of my head when I hit it. It really hurt. I grabbed her hands to get her to stop flailing. I walked her over to the door to show her what she had done. She could tell I had lost patience with her antics, so she stormed out. About an hour later, she showed back up. This time she brought her mom along, and the cops. The officer took my statement and looked me over. He asked if I wanted to press charges or needed an ambulance. I said no to both. The cop then escorted the two of them off my property and told them to take it up in small claims court if they wanted to pursue it further. After that incident, I was done with her drama for good. I changed the locks and blocked her number. I made sure to avoid anywhere she might show up. A few weeks went by without any sign of her. Then one night, I awoke to the sound of glass breaking. She had broken in through my bedroom window in the middle of the night. She had a crazy, obsessed look in her eyes as she stood over me holding a butcher knife. I begged her to calm down and think this through, but she seemed beyond reason. She attacked me with a knife, slashing wildly at my arms and chest as I tried to defend myself. I managed to disarm her after getting cut up pretty badly. She came at me again with her bare hands, but I got control of her arms. I dragged her forcibly out the front door and called the police. They came and arrested her on the spot. She was charged with aggravated assault and burglary. I had to get stitches for my knife wounds. The police advised me to get a restraining order against her, which I did right away. I also moved out of that apartment in case she got out on bail. Her crazed obsession had gone way too far. She ended up taking a plea bargain to avoid prison time, but had to undergo mandatory counseling. I still had scars from where she cut me. The whole ordeal was terrifying and traumatic. I'm just grateful I got out of that toxic relationship when I did. Things could have been so much worse if she had attacked me with a knife back when we were still together. Some people turn very dangerous when a breakup shatters their mental stability. I learned the hard way to avoid trying to reason with someone in that state of mind. All I could do was try to defend myself as best I could until help arrived. It was a lesson about all the red flags I had ignored in that relationship. I'm thankful I found the courage to stand up for myself and walk away from it, even if her unhinged reaction went to such extremes. The experience taught me a lot about the importance of self-respect and not tolerating abuse. I also realized I needed better security measures like an alarm system in case of another break-in attempt. After the dust settled from the court case, I tried to move on with my life. I was warier when starting new relationships, keeping an eye out for warning signs. I went to therapy to process the trauma and regain my sense of safety. While it took time, I healed both physically and mentally from the scars of that experience. I met someone new who treated me with kindness and respect. Though it was hard at first, I opened up to her about my past. She helped me see that what happened was not my fault. With her support, I had worked through lingering distrust and cynicism. I chose to become stronger instead of bitter. My ex-fiancée's obsessive behavior could have destroyed me, but instead it gave me greater wisdom. I learned to value my self-worth. Now I am in a relationship where we lift each other up. We communicate openly and consider each other's feelings. The contrast to my past dysfunction could not be clearer. I am thankful to have found someone who brings out the best in me. While that traumatic break-in was horrific, it redirected my life toward more positivity. I did not let it defeat me, but use it as motivation to connect with someone in a healthy, supportive way. My scars remain, but they remind me of how far I have come. Though that experience was a nightmare, it taught me lessons that have ultimately improved my life for the better. I had my first real relationship in high school. I worked part-time at a fast food place, and this girl I worked with asked me out. We'll call her Jemima. I was pretty excited since I'd never had a girlfriend before. So Jemima and I went on our first date, and it seemed to go well. When I called her later that night, she dropped the L-bomb saying she loved me. I thought it was quick, since we'd only been talking for about a week, but I let it slide since we were young. Over the next couple months, things got weirder. Jemima would make plans with me and then stand me up frequently. If I didn't immediately say I love you back to her, she'd get upset and guilt trip me. It started to hit me how little we had in common. She hated a lot of music, TV shows, and movies I liked, and couldn't believe I didn't share her tastes. It bothered her so much that we didn't like all the same things. I realized that was ridiculous. People don't have to share the exact same interests. I also noticed Jemima lied a lot about minor things. Her stories never lined up. I couldn't trust what she said anymore. I knew I needed to break up with her, but I had low self-esteem, and it was my first relationship. I didn't want to hurt her feelings, so instead of being direct, I just stopped calling her. Of course, she didn't get the hint since she was the one who called me 90% of the time anyway. When we did talk, I tried to work up the nerve to break up with her, but I always chickened out. Finally, after a week of this, Jemima asked if I wanted to end things. I said yes. As expected, she was devastated and cried heavily. But I calmly explained all my reasons. The lack of common interests, the lying, the standing me up. I felt relieved to have finally been honest. A few days later, Jemima and I ended up working a shift together. I hadn't mentally prepared to see her again so soon. She broke down crying, and I saw our manager consoling her in the break room. Over the next week, some coworkers who I had been friendly with suddenly started acting cold and distant. One of them finally told me Jemima had been telling everyone I broke up with her over musical differences, that I thought her taste in music was stupid. She cherry-picked one minor issue from my whole laundry list of reasons and twisted it. My reputation took a big hit, and I lost several work friendships as a result of her smear campaign against me. I was frustrated that people only heard her side of things. It took a long time to rebuild my image there. In the following years, I ran into Jemima around town periodically. She'd always wanted to get back together, but there was no way I'd go down that road again. I went out of my way to avoid her when I could. If I spotted her somewhere, I'd turn and walk the other direction so she didn't see me. The whole thing was exhausting. The most satisfying encounter happened years later when I went to the mall to make the final payment on a layaway item. I walked into the department store, and who should be working behind the counter but Jemima? I tried to play it cool as she rang me up, making small talk. Of course, she used this opportunity to ask me out again. As I handed over my payment receipt for the item, I simply said, "I'm not sure my fiancé would like that. I'm here picking up the engagement ring I bought." Jemima's jaw dropped, and I walked out feeling like I finally got the best of her. That was the last time I ever saw or heard from her again, thankfully. Jemima was a prime example of a toxic, crazy ex. I'm grateful that relationship fizzled fast, and that I trusted my instincts to get away from her lies and manipulation when I did. All I can say is, thank goodness I ultimately married someone stable, honest, and loving. Looking back now as an adult, I can see how young and inexperienced I was when I first dated Jemima. I didn't understand what healthy communication and boundaries looked like. I put up with her unhealthy behavior and let the relationship drag on longer than it should have. Part of dating and relationships is learning from your experiences over time. With each new person, you start to gain clarity on what you want and need in a partner. You learn to identify red flags faster and stand up for yourself. After that teenage fling with Jemima, I took time to reflect on what I wanted to avoid in the future. The next few girls I dated weren't the right fit either, but they helped me continue to learn and grow. By college, I had a much better sense of my dating values. When I eventually met my wife, Julie, in my early 20s, I knew pretty quickly she was the real deal. Julie was kind, independent, communicative, and we shared core values. We naturally supported each other's interests instead of competing. There was an easy, unforced flow to our relationship. Marrying Julie was the smartest decision of my life. We built a happy marriage and family together, full of trust, laughter, and love. She's my best friend and partner. With her, I've continued to evolve into my best self over the years. When I look back to those early stumbles in high school, I'm grateful for the lessons they provided, even if messy at the time. Dating Jemima taught me what I didn't want in a relationship. It helped pave the way for recognizing the right person when Julie came along. Though memories of Jemima still make me cringe, I can now view that chapter as a necessary part of my journey. It led me to learn relationship skills that changed the trajectory of my life. Without those tough experiences early on, I may not have been ready for the happiness I have today. It started out subtle at first, a few too many calls during class that I'd ignore, some angry texts that I'd brush off, the classic signs of possessiveness that I chalked up to him just missing me. But then it started ramping up. The calls became incessant, even during my midterm review. I declined them, trying to focus on what I needed to learn, but my phone buzzed and lit up constantly in my lap. I figured I'd deal with it later. Staying in that review session was my priority. When class ended, I saw I had 17 missed calls and twice as many frantic texts. Before I could even gather my things, the classroom door flew open. There he was, eyes wild and breathing heavily. He grabbed my arm roughly, digging his fingers into my skin. I cried out in shock and pain as he dragged me towards the door. My classmates watched in stunned silence as this scene unfolded before them. I begged them with my eyes to help me, but they seemed frozen in place. Terror washed over me. I tried to wrench my arm free, but his grip was too tight. Once we were in the hallway, I planted my feet firmly on the ground. I told him to stop, that he was hurting me. He rambled about how I was cheating on him and betraying him, how he had seen the texts and knew what I was doing. I had no idea what he was talking about. Eventually, he stormed off, leaving me shaking and rubbing my bruised arm. I went back to my dorm, thoughts racing about how our relationship had taken such a dark turn. As I unlocked my door, I felt a sense of unease, like I was being watched. I opened the door and gasped in horror. Our room was destroyed. My laptop lay mangled on the ground, the screen completely shattered. My mirror had a huge crack down the middle, the jagged edges stained with blood. Torn pages from my diary were scattered everywhere. With trembling hands, I picked one up. It was an entry about feeling relieved that we had broken up. I answer, he had broken in, read my diary, and flew into a jealous rage, destroying everything. I swept up the mess with tears in my eyes, called the police, and changed my locks. But this was only the beginning. Over the next few weeks, his obsessive behavior escalated. He started showing up everywhere I went, waiting outside my classes, appearing at my workplace, lurking outside my dorm. I'd catch glimpses of him following me around campus, ducking behind trees or peeking around corners whenever I turned around. His presence was constant, inescapable. I never knew where he'd turn up next. Along with the stalking, he continued to destroy my property to send a message. My tires were slashed multiple times. He spray-painted vicious threats on my car. Rocks were thrown through my window in the middle of the night. Each morning, I'd wake up wondering what damage he had done while I slept. I was on edge, constantly looking over my shoulder. He was unrelenting in his harassment, determined to make my life a living hell. The authorities kept saying they couldn't do much without evidence it was actually him. I installed security cameras and recorded his vandalism, but they claimed it still wasn't enough proof. Meanwhile, I was growing more and more paranoid, my nerves completely frayed. This man who I had once loved had become my dangerous, obsessive stalker. He was escalating at an alarming rate. I was terrified of what he might do next, especially if he caught me alone somewhere. One night, as I was leaving the library, he appeared out of the shadows and grabbed me. He screamed in my face that I belonged to him and no one else. I screamed and fought back until some students came along and scared him off. Shaken to my core, I filed a restraining order the very next day. I had reached my breaking point. I needed authorities to take me seriously before something tragic happened. Finally, with the documented stalking and the restraining order, the police arrested him. I breathed a sigh of relief knowing he was locked up and I was temporarily safe. But I knew when he made bail, the nightmare would begin again. Sure enough, a week later, he was back to his usual antics. More slashed tires, banging on my door at 3 a.m., leaving threatening notes on my car. The stalking and harassment didn't stop. The months dragged on like this, my anxiety building every day. I felt so powerless and alone. He was always one step ahead of me, and I lived in constant fear of what he'd do next. After nearly a year of this nonstop torment, he graduated and moved away. The stalking stopped just as suddenly as it started. Finally, I began to feel safe again, the numbness inside me slowly thawing. When I looked back on that day in class when it all began, I shook my head at how blind I was to the warning signs. His controlling behavior and obsessive attachment should have been major red flags. I was lucky I escaped when I did without suffering violence at his hands. He put me through a year-long nightmare that left me scared and wary. But I emerged on the other side grateful to be free, with hard-won wisdom to guide me going forward. I would never ignore those warning signs again. Looking back now, I can see all the red flags that I missed when I first met him. I was only 18 and head over heels in love, so I let things slide that I shouldn't have. We moved fast like most young couples do. We met, fell in love, moved in together, got engaged, and married all within a couple of years. I was so happy and excited to start my life with him that I overlooked the subtle ways he started to change after each new step in our relationship. It started small. He'd get a little meaner, yell over insignificant things, or start arguments over nothing. At first, I thought I was just being too sensitive, so I let it go. Then he started hitting walls when angry or being extra rough when we play fight. One time he pinned me down and tried suffocating me with a pillow, laughing it off later as just messing around. Looking back now, that should have been my first cue to get out, but I was young and so in love that I believed him when he apologized and promised he didn't really mean it. His drinking started increasing steadily too. When I'd gently bring it up, concerned about his health, he'd lash out in anger, so I learned to stay silent. On Christmas Eve 2011, after a night of particularly heavy drinking, he passed out cold in his mom's foyer. I spent that night silently cleaning up his mess so he wouldn't choke in his sleep, while also trying to dodge his fists when he'd wake up swinging in confusion. The horrible things he said to me that night were some of the worst I'd ever heard. Still, we hadn't been married very long at that point, so I stayed, hoping things would get better. It didn't. On my 26th birthday in January 2012, we went out to dinner with friends and had a nice night until someone asked me a question about sports. I don't follow sports closely, but not knowing the answer unleashed his fury. He called me vile names right there in the restaurant and caused a scene over something so small and insignificant. On the drive home, he brought it up again, and in his continued rage, he swerved into oncoming traffic, nearly killing us both. I managed to grab the wheel and pull us back into our lane just in time. When we got home, his angry tirade continued. He stormed around the house throwing objects and screaming insults at me before going for the knife drawer in the kitchen. Fearing for my safety, I ran upstairs, barricading myself in the guest room. He pounded on the door for a good 15 minutes, cursing and yelling threats, before finally passing out on the floor from all the alcohol in his system. The next day, while he was at work, I called 5 of my friends to come over and help me quickly move out. I packed up my belongings and important documents and left before he returned home. I filed for divorce soon after, but he has fought me every step of the way, dragging the process out for over a year now. Looking back now, I can recall so many little instances over the years that should have been clear wake-up calls to leave him sooner. But when you're that young and in love, you make excuses for bad behavior and downplay the red flags, always believing that things will get better if you just hang in there. I remember early in our relationship when he first started losing his temper over minor annoyances. We were driving to see a movie and got stuck in traffic, causing us to arrive a little late. He flew into a rage, pounding his fists on the steering wheel and cursing loudly. At the time, I thought his reaction was over the top, but I let it go, assuming the stress at his new job was getting to him. There was also the weekend camping trip with friends when he drank too much around the campfire. He ended up storming off into the woods alone after a playful joke offended him. I finally found him passed out under a tree hours later. Looking back, his binge drinking tendencies appeared early on. And who could forget the frightening panic I felt when we were goofing around one day and he playfully put his hands around my throat, pretending to choke me. It was just for a few seconds, but the look of excitement in his eyes seriously disturbed me. Little moments like those should have been warning signs for me to take a step back and reevaluate our relationship. But again, when you're a young, impressionable 18-year-old in your first serious relationship, you tend to explain away questionable behavior and give second chances. I'm just grateful I finally got the courage to get out when I did. The divorce process has been long, painful, and messy, but with the help of my lawyer, I'm almost free. I'm not that dumb, love-struck 18-year-old anymore. Now I know what the early signs of abuse look like, and I will never ignore them again. The lesson came at a high personal cost, but it taught me to value and fiercely protect myself. I'm wiser now and will choose my next partner carefully. My journey has been difficult, but it has given me strength and resilience that will serve me well going forward. The future is filled with promise and possibility now that I've escaped that toxic relationship. I'm 25 now, but the trauma of my past relationship still haunts me. When I was just 19 years old, I found myself in a nightmare of a marriage that nearly cost me my life. It all started when I got pregnant with my ex-husband's child. We had been together for a couple of years, and I thought he was a one. But the day I told him I was expecting, everything changed. He exploded in a rage, accusing me of cheating and saying I had given him herpes, which was a lie. I was clean. Before I knew it, he had kicked me out of our home, leaving me with nowhere to go and a baby on the way. Alone and frightened, I tried to reason with him, to get him to see that I had been faithful. But he refused to listen, convinced that I had betrayed him. That's when things took an even darker turn. One day, he showed up at my parents' house where I was staying and dragged me out to his car. He drove us to a remote location near a lake, and that's when the unthinkable happened. He held my head under the water, trying to drown me. I'll never forget the terror I felt, struggling to breathe as the water filled my lungs. I thought I was going to die right then and there, leaving my unborn baby without a mother. Somehow I managed to break free and escape, but the trauma of that day has never left me. Just a few months later, my son was born, and I was overjoyed. But my happiness was short-lived. When he was just 4 months old, we received the devastating news that he had cancer. I was devastated, but I knew I had to be strong for my little boy. I vowed to do whatever it took to help him through this fight. During this time, my ex-husband was nowhere to be found. He had moved on, getting his cousin pregnant not once, but twice, and then leaving her for the woman he had been cheating on me with at the beginning of our marriage. It was like a twisted soap opera, and I was left to pick up the pieces. Despite everything he had put me through, he had the audacity to try and worm his way back into my life, even as he started a new family with his new wife. He would call me, begging me to take him back, and even try to get the other woman he had been with to do the same. It was as if he thought he could just erase the past and start over, leaving me and his other children behind. And to add insult to injury, he refused to pay child support for our son or the 2 daughters he had with his other ex-girlfriend. I was struggling to make ends meet, trying to provide for my son and keep a roof over our heads while he lived it up with his new wife. It was a living hell, and I felt so utterly alone. I had this beautiful baby who was fighting for his life, and I had to do it all on my own, with no support from the man who had once promised to love and cherish me. I had never felt so betrayed and so powerless. But I refused to give up. I poured every ounce of my being into caring for my son, taking him to countless treatments and trying to keep his spirits up. And through it all, I found the strength to move forward, to rebuild my life. I met a wonderful man who loved me and my son unconditionally. He didn't care about my past or the baggage I carried. He just wanted to be there for us. We got married, and he became the father my son had never had. And just when I thought I had finally found peace, my ex-husband resurfaced, trying to worm his way back into our lives. He would call, text, and even show up unannounced, begging me and the mother of his other 2 children to take him back. It was as if he thought he could just erase the past and start over with no regard for the pain and trauma he had caused. But I refused to let him back in. I had worked too hard to build a new life, to find happiness and stability for my son. I wasn't going to let this man, who had once tried to take my life, waltz back in and destroy everything I had worked for. It's been a long, hard road, but I'm finally in a good place. My son is in remission, and my husband and I are a happy, loving family. And as for my ex-husband, he's still out there trying to convince the world that he's a changed man. But I know the truth, and I'll never let him back in. He's a toxic, manipulative person, and I refuse to let him hurt me or my family ever again. The scars of that relationship will never fully heal, but I'm grateful for the strength and resilience I've gained. I know that I'm a survivor, and that no matter what life throws my way, I have the power to overcome it. And that's the greatest victory of all. Even after everything I went through, part of me still loved the man I thought he was in the beginning. When we first got together, he made me feel like the most special person in the world. He would bring me flowers for no reason, take me on romantic weekend trips, and make these grand proclamations of his undying love. I realize now it was all just a facade, a trap to lure me in before revealing his true abusive nature. But those happy early memories are hard to let go of, even knowing the pain that came after. It took me a long time to stop blaming myself for not seeing the signs sooner. My friends and family would say, "I told you so," what a terrible guy he was. Maybe if I had listened, I could have gotten out sooner and avoided so much trauma. But he had me so brainwashed, I was convinced he was my soulmate and that our love could conquer all. Even after I left him, he kept trying to reel me back in with promises that he had changed and pleas for another chance. It took all of my willpower to resist those manipulations and stand firm that I deserved better. When he realized I wouldn't take the bait, that's when the ugliness really came out. The harassing texts and calls, showing up drunk at my home, threats against my loved ones. I had to get a restraining order just to feel safe. I still have the occasional nightmares where I'm back with him, begging him to stop hitting me as my child cries helplessly in the background. I wake up relieved it was only a dream, but also filled with sorrow that so many women face that horrible reality every day. My experience opened my eyes to the terrifying prevalence of domestic violence, and I now volunteer to help other victims escape their abusers. Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.